I'm doing everyone. Hope you're having a good day. We're having a almost sunny day, but soon to turn to rain. And it's back to being kind of cool this morning. So it was like 37 degrees Fahrenheit, which is I don't know, not a lot. About 3 degrees Celsius. So kind of a cool morning this morning. Who doesn't like a good Disney movie? Not some of the stuff they've been putting out lately, but a good Disney movie or a good Hallmark movie. Especially Hallmark movies, they're always the same thing, right? Like a guy and a girl, they meet each other under unusual circumstances, and they eventually fall in love, and then eventually there's a problem, and it looks like things aren't going to work out, and then somehow miraculously they come back together, and then they live happily ever after. We all love the happily ever after endings to movies. That's so many movies are built on that concept. The problem is probably the reason we like them, but the problem with them is all too often life is not like that. It doesn't always end up happily ever after for many people. And our story on Gideon, as we're winding to a close this week, is a story that doesn't end well. We started to look at that last week when we looked at the end of Gideon's life. Jerubbaal, son of Joash, that's Gideon, went back home to live. And here's the two clues about what was going on in his life. He had 70 sons of his own, and he had many wives. Doesn't even tell us how many, but there was a lot of them. And he also had a concubine. Concubine is like a second class wife. I called a concubine a legal girlfriend on the side. In a lot of ways, that's what it had become, a concubine. We might look at what is a concubine in the Old Testament? Why did God put up with it? But these were outside of what God had prescribed for how a person is supposed to live. It's supposed to be one man with one woman, ideally for a lifetime. And you make your family and you raise them, and you pass things on to the next generation. He stepped outside of that. He also used his fame somehow to acquire a lot of money because he would have been behaving like this because of his stature in the community, but he also would have needed a great deal of money to do this. You cannot raise 70 children and who knows how many wives it would take to have 70 children. Even if every woman had 10, that would be seven wives, but probably they did not average 10. If they only average five, which is still a fair-sized family, that's 20 wives. Plus, he has the legal girlfriend on the side. So things, like on the one hand, things did not end well. He did uh, hold on to his faith in God to the end. And we're going to have a little clue about that in a second in today's passage. But I just wanted to review where Gideon went in his life after the great victories, after the great lessons about who God is and trusting him and walking with him. He allowed himself to be influenced by the culture around him and pursued some avenues that just were not healthy or prescribed by God. This is how things end immediately after. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals or Baals. They set up Baal Berith as their god, and they did not remember the Lord their God who had rescued them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. They also failed to show any loyalty to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in spite of all the good things he had done. What a sad place for them to end up in. As soon as Gideon is off the scene, they return to worshiping other gods. And it's worse, it's not even syncretism where you bring two belief systems together and try to hold on to both of them at the same time. And so a great many people try to do that today. No, this is worse than that. They cast aside their relationship with the only true and living God to to follow a false God, a man-made God, both man-made in intellectually in what you think about them and man-made physically. There would have been an idol that somebody physically made out of stone or wood. And the nonsense of believing a thing made by human hands out of stone and wood could do anything for you. But they immediately returned to that. Now, the Bible uses very strong language here. I don't know if you picked up on that. It says that the Israelites again prostituted themselves. That is really, really strong language. In other places, uh, the phrase that is frequently used is uh, adultery or adulteress. So when Jesus looked at the crowd of people that were demanding signs from him, he said, "You wicked and adulterous generation." If you look at the prophets at the end of the Old Testament, they frequently used the language of adultery to explain where Israel was at. Because this marriage relationship that God that we feel so free to experiment with today in our culture, like we can just take what God made and redefine it in a bazillion different ways, and it's just going to be okay. This marriage relationship was core to what God had done when he created human beings. It was a foundational stone that society and family was meant to be built on. God himself describes his relationship to Israel as a married relationship. He calls Israel his wife. Jesus, we are called the bride of Jesus. And there's going to be a wedding ceremony one day where the church is formally wedded to Jesus. Again, the relationship between the God and the church is illustrated in the relationship of a marriage. And so this word picture of marriage and then things that go wrong in marriage, adultery, prostitution, these are word pictures that are used to describe in very vivid terms a relationship, sometimes good and then sometimes bad. And so the people prostituted themselves to the Baals, and there was more than one of them. And then it goes on to name a very specific one that they set up, but there was many of them. So they traded in a belief in one God for not only a belief in the one God and other gods, nope, they cast him aside and a belief in many, many gods. And this is going to be, out of all these gods, this is going to be our God. That was what they went and did for themselves. But what led them to do that? And to me, this is where a lesson is for us, because we're not going to run after Baals. I don't know, hardly know anybody that's going to set up a physical. There might be, but I doubt there's very many people watching my podcast that are going to set up a physical idol and decide, oh, that's the real God versus the creator God that we know of. But we can still neglect and even at times walk away from our relationship with God. And this is where it all starts. So I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to highlight something. It says, and they did not remember the God who rescued them from the hands of all of their enemies on every side. That was the problem. They failed to remember who the God is and what he had done for them. Isn't it interesting that Jesus basically only gave us two symbolic acts to do as believers and followers of him? Baptism being the first one. And if you haven't been baptized yet, you need to contact me. We can arrange that and do it, especially this summer when I'm up. And the weather's a little more cooperative. We can do a baptism. But the other one is communion. And in communion specifically, it says, Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. Remembering what God had done and who God is so critical to having a healthy faith relationship in Him. And when we begin to forget and not actively think about who He is, what He has done, we are putting our spiritual relationship with Him at risk. Maybe not to do what the Israelites had done, but still, many a Christian has shipwrecked their faith, and it often begins with the simple act of not remembering. So that's my word for the day. I hope encourages your heart a little bit in a positive way, even though the story is not a happily ever after story. And we're going to come back on Lord willing on Wednesday and Friday and finish up this story and see where it all ends. But between now and then, I hope you have a good couple of God bless days.